the sort of conflict for which we are preparing, and which to some extent we're now seeing in Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, is actually going to have quite a lot of similarities with conflicts of the past. It has new elements, and I think we, we may want to talk about this. Drones appear as a major element of this new sort of conflict. But by and large, we're also seeing trench warfare and infantry assaults and armored assaults, very similar things to the sort of things we've seen in past wars.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing because it's quite sort of conventional in some ways. And then there is this blending, as you say. So let's talk about the kind of use of drones. How have these two kind of styles, I suppose, of warfare, how have they worked? Have they it feels like they've not seamlessly come together in Putin's case.
Well, I think that there's two sets of issues. One, why hasn't Putin been able to achieve what he wanted to achieve? And that's partly because he got the politics all wrong. He had a caricature view of Ukraine. This led to a rather complacent military operation. And then there's the fact of Ukrainian resistance, which required, again, basic anti-tank weapons and artillery. Drones appeared quite early on in that, but they reflected what we'd perhaps come to expect of these unmanned vehicles being really rather capable, quite smart with their own weaponry and so on. And what we've seen over the course of the past 2 years is a move, not that these capable drones still exist, but tens of thousands of very cheap basic drones that can provide not bad surveillance of what the opponent is up to, and ability to drop grenades on the opponents. And these have made an enormous difference in the way that this war is being conducted. Now, you have to keep in mind that air power has played less of a role than we expected. And if the West was fighting, air power would probably be more important. But it's still quite a remarkable shift.
We have quite a sort of, in some ways it feels difficult to define relationship with war, in that clearly we are anxious to repeat mistakes of the past where war has engulfed the world and has resulted in long, protracted, drawn-out and deadly conflict for years. And yet, in other ways, as we've been reflecting on this programme, over the last number of weeks particularly, there's been a real intensification of conversation around our lack of readiness to engage in any sort of conflict at all. And I'm just wondering how all of that fits into the picture of how prepared we need to be, knowing what we should be prepared for, and actually it still feeds off this kind of reluctance to engage in conflict.
Well, the reason why our country and many others are reluctant to engage in conflict, and this has affected the way that we've supported Ukraine, is a fear of nuclear war. Nuclear war is the most transformational, or nuclear weapons, the most transformational capability that we've seen. It's why the major powers don't want to go to war with each other, why NATO and Russia, despite everything, are not actually directly fighting each other. And that's why we don't have conscription anymore. Conscription was ended in 1957 because it was assumed that we'd rely on nuclear deterrence to stop wars. So and if you expect a war to be nuclear, then you may think there's not a lot of point in signing up. But of course, we've seen all sorts of ways in which armed forces get used without nuclear weapons being used. And I think that partly explains the tension in an existential war, where you're really fighting for the survival of the country, for the state. Hard to imagine that nuclear weapons wouldn't get used. If it's not existential, people may be not quite sure about signing up anyway. So I think that's one reason why we have this slightly awkward debate that we've been having over the last month or so about whether young people really would sign up or not.
Yeah, is there still, or where should I say, where does influence lie when it comes to, if I can put it like this, pre-conflict diplomacy? So in that kind of pre-conflict stage, and obviously the always stated purpose is to try to avoid conflict, where does weight with diplomacy lie? Is that still in the same place as the UK, the US, etc.?
Well, I mean, the US is clearly still the world's most substantial power. I think the difficulty we're seeing, and this is relevant to the way that wars the actual wars happen, is that all sorts of forms of military power have now been spread out, so
Mm.
that the Houthis in Yemen, which are a pretty poor militia, nonetheless are able to build missiles and dispatch them in ways that threaten shipping um, in the Red Sea. So you have real problems um, in in working out with whom you're negotiating, whether you can negotiate what these people want, and whether you've really got the military capability not to hurt them, which we can certainly be done, but actually to stop them doing what they keep on wanting to do. And without that, the diplomacy becomes pretty difficult. Where you see diplomacy working, for staying with the same crisis, is, for example, the conversations with Iran. There's a lot of diplomacy going on at the moment to try to make clear to Iran that there's limits to how far it should let its proxies go, and there are dangers there. So diplomacy doesn't stop, and the US and its allies play an important role in that. But power has changed. It's not. There's no longer a time when you could just dictate
Mm.
from Western capitals what others should do.
If you were the defence secretary, where would you be spending money in defence and in the armed forces, kind of in the big picture, Sir Lawrence?
I think again, keep to basics at the moment. We there's a real recruitment crisis. Um, you've got to make the job attractive. There's not a lot in the cupboard now in terms of ordnance, because rightly, in my view, we've given a lot to Ukraine. There's an urgent need just to build up our basic stocks, and I think also don't get overawed by future technologies.
Mm.
There's We've wasted a lot of money trying to get absolutely super weapons, whereas mass is still important, numbers are still important, and if we squander so much on um, prestige procurement programs, sometimes we miss the basic capabilities that an everyday conflict you may need. So, I mean, the real priority at the moment, I think, is people,
Mm.
where the numbers are really seriously down.
Sir Lawrence Freedman, it's really good to speak to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.